Attention listeners, ahead are spoilers.
Hello, and welcome to The Movie Trap. The Movie Trap filled with dudes who watch dude movies about dudes. Joined with me is my co-host and co-friend, Chris Boruff.
I know a thing or two about performing.
And with me as well, my other co-host and other co-friend, Zach Powers.
I'm English and I'm high.
That would have been a more fun movie, I
what
think.
probably Aaron? Well, that wasn't anyway. Welcome to The Movie Trap. On The Movie Trap, each of the three hosts you just met get to pick one of the three hosts you just met picks a theme, and then each of us picks a movie based on that theme. Once we've watched all three movies, each of us gets to vote on which movie was our favorite, or least not favorite, however you want to splice it. We each get with an allocated amount of points, plus some bonus points that we get to divvy out along the way. And then whichever host's movie wins the vote gets to pick the next theme. And good news, we are in a brand new theme today, because previously on The Movie Trap, Boruff won Zach's cities themes with this new batch of movies we are going to be calling genre shift themes, meaning that somewhere in the movie changes from one genre to another. This is a kind of nebulous topic, I feel. It's going to be hard to, I think, fence in, I believe, because it's difficult. And this movie did us no favors, because he chose the very experimental film Performance from 1970, starring James Fox and Mick Jagger. So yeah, that is what you are in for today, guys, and I'm not gonna lie, it's a ride.
It's a rough one.
Without further ado, before we get, yeah, it's to Boruff's credit, he hasn't seen it before, but we'll get into that in a minute. But real quick, I mentioned some points earlier in the intro. Each of us gets an equal amount of 10 points for final voting, but each of us has 3 bonus points to give out to each other for whatever reason we see fit. Okay, so Zach, I think you have the hardest job of the podcast today, and that is to tell us the plot of the movie Performance. So,
Sure.
by all means, my friend.
Performance is a 1970 British drama, crime, psychedelic, experimental movie directed by Donald... music video directed by Donald Cammell and Nicholas Roeg, previously of Don't Look Now, on this same podcast. It stars James Fox and Mick Jagger, who has a side job as a musician in a band called the Rolling Stones. Anyway, the premise...
Him as a fresh-faced 20-something in this, I think. He was
fairly young. Yeah. Regardless, the movie is about a young Londonite hooligan named Chaz, who works for a gangster named Harry Flowers, doing various hooligan shit. And as you might expect, hooligan shit involves, hijacking cars,
Trash
and
cans
then
through windows.
Yep, trash cans through windows. Yeah, you steal a car with the driver in it. You pour chemicals on the car. You shave the driver's head. Things of that nature.
Right.
Yeah, I think it was acid.
Look,
I think that was supposed to be what that was, even though
I think it was supposed to be acid too, but it just looked like
we've all
some
seen
liquids
Bugsy
that
Malone.
steamed.
just a nice hot cup of tea over the car. You can't take this, can you? Sorry.
Yeah, you have a bunch of Nicholas Roeg sex scenes where they're very long and just a lot of nudity. Common theme for his movies. Regardless, his boss, kingpin gangster Harry Flowers, decides he wants to take over a shop owned by a fella named Joey Maddox. And Chaz is sent to bring this Maddox guy in. Even though they have a bit of a history, he ends up smashing and trashing his shop before embarrassing him when he forces him into the car to meet with Flowers. Flowers is like, listen, I'm going to take over your shop. Technically, we're partners. That's just the deal. But Maddox is angry at Chaz, this hooligan who enjoys the violence and the game and the roughhousing too much. He's a wild dog. And Maddox decides to take his revenge by throwing red paint all over his apartment and then kind of beating him up for a little while. And ultimately, Chaz manages to get a gun while they're kind of exacting the revenge on him and kills Maddox. At which point, he packs a bug-out bag and runs away. Yeah. So Chaz heads to the English countryside, where he overhears an old woman talking to one of her tenants, a musician who is going on tour. And he says, hey, I'll be back in a little while. Don't worry about it. You still got the other tenants there, blah, blah, blah. And he decides to jump on this opportunity and pretend he's a friend of the guy who's leaving on tour. So he has a place to live for a while through this old woman. And so he moves into this little flat where already there are a few tenants. There is, and let me just find their names real quick, Turner, sort of a formerly big musician who is sort of going through writer's block or, the like. There is Ferber, who is, there's two women, Ferber and Lucy. And you might have to help me. Which one? Lucy is Turner's sort of main girlfriend who is English. And then Ferber has threesomes with them sometimes, but also is around. And then there's a child. And there's a little child.
A little girl named, right.
Dana.
Who just
like a street urchin.
Who's just like a big fan.
Yeah.
Comes and goes. Yeah. Like a stray cat, right. This child.
Yeah. Like Wiggins to Holmes.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So under the guise of
Lorraine, that's the child.
Yes.
Yeah. They call her like Lonnie or something.
Not that point matters at all. Keep going.
Under the guise of a performer, a juggler called Johnny Dean, he moves in with these people. Initially, he has conflict with them, in particular Turner, who is sort of not a fan of him living there. But as time goes by, he, is hanging out. He takes baths while the little child just hangs out with him in the bath. And they talk about Turner. He gets to know these people a little more. They do random shit. And eventually one day, Ferber decides to make dinner and throws a whole shit ton of mushrooms in the mix. And Chaz goes on a little bit of a trip. He's been reevaluating his look. He dyed his hair red to go on the lam, and now he's like, well, maybe I'll try some other crazy stuff. And under the influence of the mushrooms, he tries flowing clothes and perhaps even like a little bit of female clothing. And even though he is angry when he finds out that he has been drugged and threatens to kill Turner in particular, he eventually goes with the flow and kind of embraces this more alternative sort of hippie, sort of, trippy lifestyle, Bohemian, psychedelic lifestyle. Yeah. He even begins a relationship with Lucy, the foreign person. But and indeed, mixed in this during the trip, there is a big music video where Mick Jagger is a gangster and he tells the other gangsters to take off their clothes. Then
which itself is a theme for movies I've picked.
I know. I was going to specifically bring that up.
Right. Yeah.
So However, Chaz also needs to get on the run because this is not a permanent place for him. He has called his friend Tony, and Tony is being tapped by Harry Flowers, and he gives him up the information of where he's hiding out, and Flowers and his henchmen come down to track down Chaz, take him out, and kill him for his, killing of Maddox. Chaz manages to convince them to let him go upstairs because he also has a gun and collect his things. While he's upstairs, he briefly talks with Turner and Ferber before shooting and killing Turner, Mick Jagger, and leaving the body in a closet. Then he's escorted to the car by the other gangsters, and in his new alternative look and style, he is driven away, presumably to be killed. His face is also swapped briefly with the face of Turner. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, good job.
He's driven away to be killed. And his identity has obviously been changed and influenced by Turner, and in some ways maybe they're one and the same in regards, that sort of thing. That's it. That's the movie.
Boy, howdy.
Suppose. Yeah. Zach, you did your ever-loving best. I mean, it's difficult to convey how strange this frickin' movie is because...
Yeah, I mean, this is...
even...
a longish movie. I mean, it's 105 minutes, and a lot of it is just kind of fucking around, I guess. It is a cult film. I should note this just because I don't know, some or all of us might be sort of negative on this movie. It is worth noting that the British Film Institute calls it the 48th greatest British film of all time, or did so in 1999. And in 2008, Empire magazine said it was the 182nd best movie ever made. And it does indeed have a critical a cult following.
See, for me, this is weird because I don't think that it would have hit 50. I would have given this an F if I was grading the films. I don't get how it broke the curve. Sorry. I didn't like this movie a whole lot.
In a way, I do understand it. No, I actually think the only thing that saved me through this movie is that I wasn't feeling well when I was watching it. So the movie kind of matched that tone in a fever dream sort of sense. So in that sense, I just sort of okay, movie, I guess you and I can't tell the difference if I'm awake or asleep either. But in a way, Boruff, I sort of kind of push back on that. I didn't like this movie at all, but I can understand, because it was released in 1970 but shot in 1968, because Warner Brothers literally gave them carte blanche to make this movie and didn't touch it, had nothing to do with the production because they thought they were getting A Hard Day's Night, and then this is the movie they got. So naturally Warner Brothers says, we're not fucking releasing this, we're gonna go. So it sat in a vault for 2 years before it finally released. Sure. And it had to get re-edited and everything.
In 1969 you get Easy Rider out of the States, and they're thinking maybe Easy Rider, just for notation, a much better movie than this in my opinion.
Indeed. Well, but still kind of in that avant-garde sort of mannerism, you know what I mean?
Agreed.
In that respect, I can understand the sort of following that this movie has because it was kind of on the forefront. It was the tip of the spear for this kind of new wave of filmmaking in the West.
I can understand that. It felt... The weird thing for me is that I can kind of when I went into this film, I was doing it very much as an academic thing because, of course, I'm a big Nicholas Roeg fan. I think we've all covered that. Donald Cammell. I really like a film he made called Demon Seed, which is a real whacked out horror film that's based off the Dinar Kuntz book, I believe, because it's that old. It has a surrealist, nightmarish, death sequence in that movie because, long story short, robot goes rogue. It's an AI that takes over a house and tries to impregnate Dooley Christie. But because it was the time period, they had a bunch of geometric shapes for the robot, and the robot kills someone at one point. But rather than doing the whole choppa 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 attack, it's this weird geometric changing of shape that winds up killing someone. So I had kind of high hopes coming into this that it would have something kind of mind-blowing or weird like that. But really the only thing I got is that it was really experimental editing. And I could see how that was definitely what came up later with Nicholas Roeg and some of his later films.
Particularly the first few minutes. When I watched the first few minutes of this film, I was like, how am I ever going to discuss this movie? Because it's cutting back and forth between all this shit, and it's like him fucking in his apartment, and then like crime shit and all.
And then
like,
there's
it's
like
all
a
over.
jetliner and a Randy
And then the
Newman
overlapping
song.
dialogue and Harry Flowers talking about some horse shit that I didn't give a fuck about. And like, it's so all over the place. And then it actually does calm down. Like after that, the narrative becomes much more clear. When it started, I was like, this is going to be something I just can't recap. Like it's going to be a fucking nightmare. But then the storyline is actually not very complex. If anything, it's almost like the part where he gets run out of town happens pretty quickly. And then it's just him chilling at this house for a long time.
Yeah, it has it does have like a real thing I noticed from that time period, and just like low budget films from the past where they'll have not definitely filler sequences, but they'll have like higher budget sequences and then lots and lots of people talking because they couldn't afford to do things. So like if you're watching like a horror film or something from that time period, there'll be big kills and then people walking around a lot. Like even Wicker Man, like they built up to the scene where he met Summer Isle, and then it's just them walking around a garden for like about 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and you're like, oh, okay, well, that's fine.
Okay, but at least what they're talking about and how the scenes interact with one another, there's a through line. You know, with this one, it's I get that it was trying to be avant-garde, and that it is avant-garde, but it felt more messy than arty to me. I'm not 100% sure that anybody, while making this movie, knew what this movie was going to ultimately be. I'm not 100% convinced of that. I think, Boruff, you're right. I think this movie was largely saved, if you want to call it that, by the editing. That if there's a takeaway from it is that like it's fucked up and you're in this kind of weird psychedelic fugue state throughout the movie. I mean, like there's a very telling scene right at the beginning when Chaz is getting told off by Harry Flowers, and then right in the middle of it, everybody, like the film, kind of the processing you could tell was fucked with, and everybody turns into like this kind of ultraviolet sort of bluish, and everybody's really sweaty, like they're tripping balls. And that's a through line throughout the movie. And that's where, this is where I think we should talk about the theme in this notion. Let me ask you guys this. If there was a genre shift in this movie, and I'm willing to concede that there was, if there was a genre at all.
I do think, actually, I think it's something we need to discuss. We've never had a disqualification vote on the podcast. It might warrant one.
It's funny to me because
I'm not willing to call...
It's funny because it's the first movie of the theme that I picked, and it's the one that I would agree with disqualifying because I really don't know if it switches genres. Like, it starts off as a crime thriller, and then he goes to the house, and I was expecting, from how it had been described, I was expecting it to go completely off the rails when he got to the house and become like a surrealist nonsense thing before it gets back into being like a hard crime story. But to me, it just seems like they explained it away. It's like, oh no, they took mushrooms, so anything you're seeing is loosey-goosey because he's on shrooms the whole time for that chunk of the movie. So
interesting.
Yeah.
But, I mean, just because there's a causality for the genre shift doesn't make it not a genre shift.
No.
I mean,
I'm not going to say...
I'm willing to not call it... I'm not going to call it a disqualification.
Well, no. Let's do this formally. I think it'll be a good first on the show. I won't say which way I'm going.
Okay.
But let's have our very first disqualification vote.
Do you want to disqualify this? I mean, like, we could still keep talking about it because I've still got
of course.
I've still got a lot to say.
I think even if we disqualify it, we should still award it points. And even if it wins, it just doesn't win.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
I absolutely agree. I am completely egalitarian on this. It sounds like a perfect idea. Let's vote. we could still talk about it. There is still meat on this bone, even if it turns out to come from a sheep rather than a chicken like we thought it was going to be.
For the sake of audio, I will conduct the vote.
Okay.
Chris Boruff, are you in favor of disqualification? Aye or nay?
Aye.
Russell Carlson, are you in favor of disqualification? Aye or nay?
I think I'm going to go with nay. With nay.
Now is my turn. Zach, am I in favor of disqualification? I think I will also go with nay and allow it to remain in the contention. That said, I think the chances of this film winning are very slim anyway.
They're pretty moot, but I would really like to hear Carlson's view on why it does shift genre.
If I can give my majority opinion, if I could write the majority opinion here, I think that this is I'm gonna let it off. You've never seen it before, so that's I think a fair point to be made. 2, knowing that I have to pick the next movie, and I've been racking my brain trying to pick what I think is a good one, or what even constitutes a genre shift and not necessarily a tone shift, which is what I think this movie actually does rather than an actual genre shift. But in doing research and trying to find it, this movie shows up on a lot of lists about this topic, specifically about genre shifts. So, given that there is a consensus on this outside of the movie trap dudes, I think that I'm going to have to allow it, because if I'm not going to lie, the movie that I might have in mind, I'm not entirely convinced it's a genre shift either. And here's why I will give it a genre shift. The moment, because I will give you the moment when it happened to me, and it was...
You're playing politics now, so you're trying to seed favors for your own
I'm trying to set precedent.
Dubious choice.
I'm trying to set precedent here. Okay, but in if I'm going to say where this genre shifts, if we have to make a call there, for me it was the music video. Once the music video hit in, I'm like, okay, well, this is what this movie actually turned into. We had this whole because this is what Warner Brothers paid for. Warner Brothers paid for a Rolling Stones music video movie. Okay, so they had to shoehorn that in there somehow. So once that music video happened, that's when I'm like, okay, I guess I could technically call it a genre shift, because we'd never seen anything like that happen. Yes, it is motivated by the mushrooms, and if you want to call that a disqualifying thing, Boruff, I guess I just don't agree. Just because there's a causation for it doesn't make it not a genre shift. That's my opinion.
Okay,
I'm doing a more traditional thing. I do think that in the early part of the movie, even though the editing techniques and the psychedelic aspects are present, there is a bit more plot and conniving between gangsters like this Maddox Steele, and however fucking bizarre the shit with the car was, at least it's a weird crime thing, and they kill a guy and blah, blah, blah. And I do think that it is a little different. Even honestly, I think the tone is consistent and the genre changes. I would almost take the opposite track.
Sure.
Where then he goes to this fucking cottage in in an English village and fucks around for 15 minutes.
Well, it's funny because it looks to me like, I think the fact that you brought up specifically the drug shift and that kind of going into a different style of film, I've seen that done, I think, better. So I think for me, I'm not going to say that I don't agree with you, but I can like the movie Audition, the last 15 minutes of the movie Audition, totally get it, totally agree, because that movie does have a very intense way in which it plays out, and by the time you get to the last 15 minutes, there's a drug scene in which the guy has a nightmarish view of a bunch of things happening that he couldn't actually have learned during the movie. Zach, have you seen Audition?
I have seen Audition.
It's in the very last scene, right before he goes into he falls over, and he has this flash vision of him waking up in bed with the woman, and then he starts seeing other things about that woman's history that he wouldn't have known from the film.
Well,
which is itself,
to be fair, this movie is, I think, that movie is a extremely fair contender for this category.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
So,
But Boruff, I'm gonna give you a point for that point, because I completely agree with you. And even when I was mentioning earlier in kind of defense of the sort of following that it's developed over the years, I would say that yes, this movie is influential, but the antecedents from this movie have done it far better. I mean, even Clockwork Orange a couple of years later did it a lot
and I
better.
would say again, yes, Clockwork Orange, or even movies that are more or less contemporary, like Easy Rider, is
sure
fucking better than this movie. It has more to say. I think the most resonant theme from this movie, the one that probably holds up the best, is questioning. I think there's an idea of questioning gender identity going on. And I think that is really interesting for 1968.
Yes.
The idea of fucking around and doing a bunch of shrooms in a cottage, whatever. But the idea that gender is, you don't have to like conform to toxic masculine gender constructs. I think that's the thing about this movie that probably holds up the best.
That must have been a zeitgeist, because I think, wasn't this around the time that Ziggy
Very
Stardust
true.
and
1968.
David Bowie
What are we talking about? No, Ziggy Stardust was later, much later, but this is about the beginning of it. I mean, we're talking, this is Sgt. Pepper. Like this is still like when this movie was shot, 1968. This is still like Sgt. Pepper, and because I kind of want to talk about the Rolling Stones in general. But like culturally, Zach, I think that this movie being this kind of psychosexual exploration is very jiving with the times of the culture at the time. Not necessarily mainstream, not necessarily what Warner Brothers was paying for, but I do think they were picking up this vibe from somewhere, and the fact that Mick Jagger was all for it, sort of speaks to that as well. That they just duped Warner Brothers to give them a bunch of money to make this movie. So,
well, I think the Monkees did this too. Didn't they make the movie Head, where it was another situation where they expected a nice Monkees style, musical, and what they got was something that was a nightmarish, we're really high all the time movie.
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's sort of like what they got with The Help too. I mean, anyway. But like, I think that
The Help, the movie, the Emma
Help,
Stone,
the Help movie, the Beatles Help movie.
Oh, all right. Okay.
No,
fair enough.
Not the Octavia Spencer. Yes. No. So this is still kind of happening around the subculture. It's not as prominent, and this is where I do kind of give this movie kind of like, I can understand for academic purposes why this movie is talked about, just for that fact alone. But I don't know. I think that that's also part of the culture of like, but this movie kind of takes it a little bit further than I've ever seen before its time, where it's this kind of weird psychogenic fugue, like I immediately thought of like Mulholland Drive, where it takes this very strange turn and kind of gets weird, but it's David Lynch, so it kind of fucking figures.
Yeah, he seems like he's.
But again, I would say
I
like
almost.
I'll say I liked Mulholland Drive more than I like this movie.
Can I say something somewhat unrelated to this film for a moment?
Sure.
Have you ever seen that channel that David Lynch does, where he does the weather reports? Every day.
Yeah.
I was like, yesterday he did one. Well, every single day he says what the weather is going to be in LA. And yesterday he just stopped in the middle of it and was like, Vladimir Putin, you're going to fucking reap what you sow. You're a scourge on the nation. I hope you like a whole diatribe where he just stopped his It was very interesting. Yeah.
David Lynch, he's kind of one of my favorite guys for just that reason. Like, he often will jump up sort of unexpectedly to say very specific things. Like when he went off on people watching movies on their cell phone.
Movies on their phone. I remember that rant. Yeah.
Because it's one of those things, like, he's such an odd type that you expect everything to come out of his mouth to just be more of the sort of bizarre, surrealist stuff. But sometimes he comes up and he's just like, no, I'm a real human being with real feelings and I have a strong opinion. And it always catches me off guard. I'm surprised I didn't see that yet. I'll have to go look it up after this because, I love his weather reports in general. The fact that there's something real in one of them, that's kind of surprising.
Yeah, it's for the one from February 25th. For those listening in the future, I believe it's the February 25th weather report. It's about 4 minutes long. It's pretty straightforward for the first minute and a half or so, but
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not the hugest David Lynch fan in the world, but I've softened on him a lot.
I have issues with some of his. I'm not like The Return is a little beyond the pale for me, but
I mean, like Boruff knew me in film school when I was very vehemently anti-Lynch. I've softened on that view quite a bit. Old age takes that on to you. But person who wasn't in old age quite yet, who is in very much old age now.
But I like him as a person quite a lot.
Yeah.
Even if I don't always like his movies 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I think that what my opinion of him doesn't matter. He's a fine director and a legendary director, and he deserves praise for that. So just because he's not to my taste doesn't make him bad, But anyway, speaking of to my taste, Mick Jagger. I think he was actually pretty appropriately cast in this movie for what it's worth. I thought that I expected him to sort of kind of just woodenly kind of regurgitate, but he seemed, kind of into it. That may or may not have been to do with off-screen shenanigans, knowing the Stones in the late 60s and early 70s. But one of the things I always do love about the Rolling Stones is, when this movie was made, in my opinion, the Stones haven't even hit their peak yet, because their peak came in 1971 with Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street. That's just my opinion. But what I've always liked about the Rolling Stones, and this goes back to the early 60s even, is that I'm a huge, blues fan, and the Stones are too, and they've never made any bones about it, and they've always said, we're just playing blues songs. And that's pretty much what Mick Jagger does throughout this movie. He just picks a guitar and starts strumming some Robert Johnson. Blind, the Dark as the Night song is played throughout. They even throw a Last Poet song in there, which is badass. In 1968, a Last Poet song that's speaking some real radical shit in their time. If you haven't heard, When the Revolution Comes by the Last Poets, get off your ass. So yeah, I'll say this, even though it wasn't clearly a Rolling Stones video, so to speak, because one of the most crucial members of the Rolling Stones wasn't even going to be a part of it, the music still kicked ass. And even if it is just Jagger strumming some Robert Johnson on a guitar, I have time for that.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is fucking fascinating to me that Chris managed to find 2 movies in a row where gangsters are forced to strip. If he does a third one...
I wouldn't say forced in this case. They seemed into it.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
If you can find in the next theme another movie where gangsters are forced to strip that doesn't get disqualified... I will say right now, I'm going to give you a bonus movie for that unbelievable feat, that unbelievable trifecta. I am willing to do it.
I'll see what I can do. I'm sure there's another one out there where the gangsters have to get naked.
I'll give you a movie and a half if you could do it without ever seeing it before. Because so far,
that would be amazing. That would truly be. Maybe you just get to pick the next year's worth of themes.
Right.
If you blindly do it 3 times.
I mean, I will say that I loved that sequence in this movie. Like, the other stuff in the movie, take it or leave it, but how weird that sequence was really sort of resonated with me, because I would not have guessed that going into that scene, the dudes who looked like they were going to kill someone would just start stripping and sort of clapping along. But I wouldn't have guessed that in the last movie that we watched either. It's really silly and weird.
Fair enough.
And I will say, these gangsters don't look especially threatening to me. They look like just some British-ass people. Like, they're the most British-ass people who have ever lived.
Well, I mean, I don't really ever
like
feel
they're high as fuck.
Yeah.
I don't really ever feel threatened by British gangsters for some reason. Like, I know I've seen the Guy Ritchie movies and all that, but I don't ever really feel threatened by anyone but
yeah,
James Jones, probably.
You got like Ralph Fiennes in Bruges. He's which I wonder, because that character has a similar name to Harry Flowers. It's like Henry Powers or Henry something, like it's a very similar name, and I wonder if there was an influence there.
Probably. We could get into what the influences this had.
I mean, I think.
Oh,
the
yeah,
influence-
there's-
I mean, like
Go ahead.
Guy Ritchie, the sort of like British gangster. I mean, but British gangster has been around since the '60s for a minute. It's been around for a while, and it certainly this is one of the weirder ones that I've ever seen. I mean, this movie's very strange. Because again, I think the gangsters don't look particularly threatening. They just look high as fuck. They just look really, really stoned. Everybody in this movie, with the exception of, I think, James Fox until the actual end, looks like really out of it. And it should be noted, this is the beginning of like the Rolling Stones, shall we say, heroin days. When they were making their best stuff. Anyway,
I think it's interesting to talk about Mick Jagger, like what he did after this movie. James Fox, I don't know if you guys read about this guy and what his deal was after this film. But it's kind of interesting in my...
He went off and became a new evangelical Christian for a while, right?
So apparently, this film was, it was screened, and a lot of critics walked out. Allegedly, a film executive's wife threw up in the movie theater. Like, what the fuck is that woman? Like, how light is your like ability to deal with anything? But apparently that happened, and it inspired him to become an evangelical Christian for like 10 years. And then he returned to acting, and he's done a bunch of shit since then. Like, he's been in Doctor Who, because every British person has, but also Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Sexy Beast, Patriot Games,
Sorry. You went into,
other
you went into
shit.
robot mode for
a
a
lot
second.
of Lost World.
Sorry, you went into robot mode for a second in the middle of that. Could you just re-say what you just said? Sorry.
So he went off and became an evangelical for about 10 years after that. And since then, he's been in a ton of shit like Doctor Who and Patriot Games, The Lost World, Sexy Beast, a whole bunch of stuff. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the one with Johnny Depp. But also interestingly, his daughter-in-law, former daughter-in-law now, is Billie Piper, and his son-in-law is Richard, I always forget, Iode? Do you guys know who this guy is?
Richard Ayoade? The guy from the IT crowd? Wait, how
Correct.
is he related to him?
He's his son-in-law.
Oh.
huh?
His daughter is married to him.
damned.
Yeah.
That is an odd
I didn't know
mix.
that he was. I didn't know that he was Billy Piper's father-in-law. Now I know he got the Doctor Who
Former.
job.
I guess I guess that marriage didn't last.
Well,
Okay, well now I know how
kinda
I got
funny.
the Doctor Who job.
Like, I don't know. Like, the people always say that this movie triggered that about him, but having watched it, I don't know if anything in this movie was really that
It's pretty
extreme.
by modern standards. I thought it was like tame and maybe even a little boring.
Yeah, well, like, people always talk about how the sex scene was unsimulated or whatever, but watching it, I'm like, I couldn't tell one way or another. It's just a bunch of stuff
I guess
put
it's
together.
I guess it speaks to people in 1970 that this movie made them fucking throw up in the theater. Like this conservative ass Tory film executive.
Well, again, I think
The concept of people fucking, I simply must throw up.
Maybe it was just
again,
the car.
I think when Warner Brothers saw this in 1968 when it was shot, I could sort of see where they're coming from. Where they're like, "Dear Lord, what did we just pay for?" But then, as we've said, then the new Hollywood kind of comes out and they get it re-edited and it ends up being released. Still not a critical success. I mean, like everybody still did not had a visceral reaction to it, but it sort of makes sense that this new modern era of shock and awe and sort of trying to be mise en scene with fucking everything or whatever, and then like get really in close with like, and the sexual revolution and stuff, kind of bringing that to the forefront when you're spending most of the early 60s trying to repress that and not make it acknowledged. By 1968 1970 you've lost that fight. So I get why they released it, because they figured, what the hell, we spent money on it, we might as well try to get a return. And you know, like, for what it's worth, the fact that it's lasted this long, you know, that can't be nothing. But I am with you guys, obviously, because, like, didn't shock me, more put me to sleep. Didn't you know, like,
I do want to give the film credit where credit is due. It is about a violent, masculine dude who, like, gets sent away and rediscovers parts of his identity that he didn't know existed, I guess, and kind of reforms himself. And there is things in that theme that are interesting, and especially for 1970, very transgressive. And so I understand some degree of the acclaim. From a modern perspective, 52 years later, it's, I don't know, man.
Yeah.
Like,
no, wasn't worth
more
it.
academic.
Wasn't worth it.
Yeah,
I mean, like,
it's
I
more,
can acknowledge it,
exactly.
but it wasn't worth it.
And actually, I'm going to give Chris a point. I think that that's an exactly great way to put this. It's academically interesting for this kind of movement, like this kind of slow evolution of gender identity issues, toxic masculinity issues. Now it seems so bland and boring, but at the time it was interesting. But to read back on it, look back on it 50 plus years later, it's like, yeah, you're not teaching me anything new, and you're not doing anything that fascinates me either.
You know,
Right. Nor are you shocking me to my core, you know, nor am I being like, oh, my stars, you know, like, I'm more like looking at my phone like, what the fuck, you know, like, so,
you know,
yeah, I don't know.
This one actually, now that we're talking about it, there's another movie that came out in 1970 that I think is actually better, that stands up currently. Like, it's a little uneven.
This is not the best movie of 1970?
Well, true, I know, it's hard to believe. There's a movie called Goodbye Gemini from 1970 that has been referenced in a lot of, I'm going to say, folk horror music. Like, I can't remember their name right now, but there's a band that does a lot of songs. And Goodbye Gemini is interesting because it's about twins, where one of the twins has an incestuous fascination with the other twin, and it just gets stranger and stranger, and it becomes more and more nightmarish as there's, like, murders and things like that happen. But there's a whole sequence in that where I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and it's very possible I could be, that the brother who has the incestuous fascination winds up being, he unwittingly ends up in a somewhat bi or gay circumstance that completely melts his mental wiring down, and he doesn't know how to handle it. And it leads to, like, a lot of the later things in the movie that are a lot more sort of bizarre, people being stabbed.
So the premise is this guy is in an incestuous situation.
Yeah.
He's fine with that. And then he's in a bi or gay situation, and that melts his brain.
Yes. But
okay,
it's more interesting at the time period to kind of view, like, what was considered transgressive and what was considered, like, normal.
No, I agree. I think that's an interesting window into
and when I say twins, it was a boy and girl twin. So that was one of the things.
Yeah, I assumed so.
But
otherwise, you know.
The thing is the reason I mention it is that it actually stands up pretty well, and it ended up on, I believe, the Video Nasties list. Because
I mean, we watched Dead Ringers, so
yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, similar. It was like Dead Ringers a little bit, but it was more overt and got stranger at the end. Like that movie, and another movie called Girly, which is similar from the same time period. Girly was essentially about a young woman and a family that sort of play an Ozzie and Harriet traditional conservative, like, family setting in England. But they keep killing people. Like, Girly keeps like attracting men. They follow her home. They get killed by the family or forced to play act with the rest of the family to be sort of an Ozzie and Harriet traditional, like, I'm gonna say Thatcher-esque, like dream family. And it just gets extremely strange. They're not movies that you're probably going to get a big thrill out of. I watched them because I was like, I'm down to see this. I'm interested in why these got banned. I can sort of see why they would be banned at the time. I'm surprised this one had like no repercussions when the Video Nasties came out.
No kidding. But I mean, because like, and I think it's because of the editing. I think the editing does so much to kind of hint at and imply without ever directly revealing. You know, like the way the crossfades work between James Fox and Mick Jagger sort of implies what the overall theme is, I suppose. So it more just kind of hints at it rather than being that directly obvious. That being said, it still doesn't make it any less, coherent or enjoyable to watch.
It reminded me of Mandy too, like the crossfades between their faces, kind of like I remember in Mandy they have the whole sequence where you guys have seen Mandy, I think.
I have seen Mandy.
I've seen Mandy.
Yeah, where there's the scene where she gets kidnapped. The girlfriend Mandy gets kidnapped by the cult, and she gets drugged heavily. And then there's a scene in which they're talking, and the cult leader's face and her face sort of merge and sort of shmoo together. That crossfade thing and the question of identity, I think was handled in an interesting fashion. I have no idea if that was a reference to this movie's sort of bizarre handling of that, but
and there's this is like there's a lot of interesting elements. The gender identity thing, the way that they switch faces, like Mick Jagger is in the Chaz role, and Fox is in the Mick Jagger role at certain points, like the way that people you meet influence who you are, and blah blah blah. Like they're theoretically interesting, but in this particular case, like either they're too old to engage with me or like too tired. Like maybe these are earlier iterations that like aren't particularly engaging anymore, or just not well done enough for me to care. Something like that.
Well, how do you guys feel about this being the best use of Mick Jagger in a movie?
I've never seen him in anything else. Was he in Pirates of the Caribbean?
No, that was Keith Richards.
I
don't know. He
was in Free Jack.
He was. Also
I haven't seen
in,
Free Jack.
Some strange Andy Garcia movie. He's done a lot more producing than being in. I mean, if we're not counting like the documentaries about the Rolling Stones, which I would say I would rather watch than this movie about 1,000 times. But I mean, I guess like it surprised me that like he was more or less, but I don't think he had to do much other than just be Mick Jagger, and just hang out with a bunch of crazy birds and do a bunch of drugs. I think that he could do that pretty easily, and just tell him what to say. He could be pretty convincing with that. But like it was fun to see like this being the Rolling Stones answer to like, the Beatles' Hard Day Night, because even Hard Day's Night, it's a fine film, but it is what it is. And the Beatles are more or less sort of like puckish clowns that sort of just like cause a bunch of mayhem. This was a lot more, the Rolling Stones always felt more dangerous than the Beatles, especially in the later 60s. I would say the Beatles felt more experimental, but I think the Rolling Stones were a lot more in the kind of delving in the dark side, so to speak. And so, yeah, I guess, I mean, outside of not really knowing his acting chops, I thought he was going to be like, kind of not really. I mean, as far as like crossover of musician to actor, there's not that many that you could say were accomplished at both. You could say Bowie if you want. He was a fine actor in things, but I mean, he was much better as a musician. I think it's the same sentiment about Mick Jagger. He's a better musician / producer than he'll ever be an actor.
I guess I'll briefly. So the one that Lucy, I think, is the one that Chaz, the main character, gets involved with late in the film. She is an immigrant from, I can't recall where offhand.
France. Or like
France.
Belgium or something.
And
we come from France.
And they're also simultaneously talking about potentially going to America, in Chaz's case, because he has no other recourse. And she's sort of reticent at that idea, I think. So I guess I suppose that this idea of boundaries and national identity is a parallel to gender identity or perhaps personal identity. I don't think they thought about it as gender identity at the time. I actually think that's a little bit more, little later in life. I think it was more like, I want to,
Not to get off on too much of a rant, but that even mirrors the career of the Rolling Stones at this point in time. And I'm not too well read on it, but what I do know is that Alan Klein, the great destroyer of the 60s British rock and roll bands, basically bilked all the Rolling Stones for the money, and they owed a bunch of taxes to the United Kingdom in like 1969, 1970. So they literally had to flee to France to avoid prosecution for taxes. Then much later, they do the same thing in France because Keith Richards gets caught with a bunch of heroin, and they basically flee to the United States where they make a bunch of money touring, and the rest is history. So it does kind of mirror that, where you have like this kind of, we need to get the fuck out of here versus, no, I want to kind of stay. So anyway.
No, yeah. I just think of like national identity versus like other forms of identity, masculine, feminine,
sure,
aggressive, passive, or whatever.
Oh, I think that's much more what they were trying to go for this movie. It's funny to look back at this movie in retrospect, considering the trajectory of the Rolling Stones from them.
For sure.
But yeah, I think that, yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Zach. No, go ahead.
No. You first, please.
I mean, like we've talked about it really. That like I think that this movie is I was gonna say, my actual thing I was gonna say is, are you ready for final thoughts? I think so. Yeah, I think I could go for final thoughts here. Zach, why don't you go first since you brought it up?
This movie is I don't know. I think there's things of historical interest. I truly think the idea of academically interesting is perhaps the best way to describe this movie. I don't think it's going to be particularly engaging to people of a modern age, people below maybe 50, people younger than this movie. I don't think it's going to be particularly challenging or engaging. But I think that it is of its time interesting. I think it tries for interesting things that now are a little more banal. And I don't think it accomplishes them with a degree of excellence that is worth classic status. So while I appreciate some of the intention and ideas, I think now as a film it is largely redundant except as a footnote. I guess that's my final thoughts on this film.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and echo those because like while I could understand this movie's obviously influential sometimes in maddeningly ways. Like it drives you crazy that like this kind of form kept going, but it was done much better. But it was hardly worth the journey. It was hardly worth the watch because I didn't particularly enjoy this film at all. I think, like I said earlier, that there are movies that may have influenced by this movie that I think did a lot better and very, very recently. It's kind of a pedestrian plot, that's sort of masked by this sort of self-indulgent psychedelia that is going out of its way to be, intellectual, but I think just ends up being kind of artsy-fartsy for its own sake.
Yeah.
I think the ambiguity of the ending sort of kind of is a tell to me because it's like, well, you're going to need a master's degree to unfurl this meaning, buddy. And I always hate that when movies fucking do that to me. It really just kind of irritates me. I don't want everything planned out. You don't have to plot everything out for me. But when you're basically saying, yep, that's the movie. We had fun making it. We don't really care if you had fun watching it. That is big off for me. So yeah, Boruff, you did warn us that this movie was gonna be some Boruff shit, and I immediately thought of like Enemy and shit. So
to Boruff's credit, a blind watch, and and it seems like we'll hear his final thoughts. I feel like Boruff was not particularly won over by this one.
That is correct. I think it is fine that I finally did watch it. I think you guys are sports for coming along with me on this. It was not the most fun watch. I think we can all agree that it was something of a Wuthering Heights, one of those things where you're reading it and it's intellectual and maybe an academic
do not tell Shannon.
I will not.
Do not say that about Wuthering Heights to my girlfriend.
I would agree with Shannon on this. Wuthering Heights is
fine. Bad example. I should just say that it's something where you've heard about it, and then when you read it, it has something where you're getting an academic understanding more than actively enjoying it or having a visceral reaction. At least not the one that was intended by the filmmakers.
I'd say maybe On the Road, not to shade Kerouac.
That one, agreed.
I'm gonna say Catcher in the Rye too for me.
Yeah.
Catcher in the Rye.
At some point, it is just typing.
Yeah.
So for me, I think having seen this, I always heard about Donald Cammell. This was talked about a lot. There was an IFC documentary about him, and it mentioned this film a lot, which was strange for me because it also introduced me to Samuel Fuller, which we had a great experience with Sam Fuller films. I think that at the end of the day, the editing definitely helped, and it definitely went somewhere. Like you could see how the French New Wave sort of influenced this, and how that eventually turned into 90s editing and the current editing and all the rest. But I think that's also sort of a detriment to this. Like, it didn't really have a good, hard story that had a purpose to do that. And I think that the filmmakers, I'm just going to assume, were somewhat high on this one when they were making it.
What?
Well,
I don't
that sounds like a pretty big assumption.
I mean, there's a quote that came back to me that I remembered, and I'm going to paraphrase this because I can't remember the exact quote. There's a documentary called The Cutting Edge where they interview editors, and they interviewed a guy named Don Camburn, who is the editor for Easy Rider, and his statement was that you can be high making a movie, but you can't be high editing a movie, because he would go in and he would edit a lot of stuff on the Sunday, a little high, come in on Monday morning and realize it was all garbage, have to throw it out and start over again. I think that this is an inspired choice to edit in this fashion. I do not think it really nailed it all the way home. We definitely saw better examples of this, like Don't Look Now. Fantastic editing. Love that in that movie. Even something else that Nick Roeg made, which was The Man Who Fell to Earth, I think was both a better example of that editing style and a better example of using a performer's cultural cachet to enhance the story. Because in this one, you have Mick Jagger being the dark overlord of evil as a scary influence. And in that one, you have David Bowie playing an alien, which was definitely the thing he had been running with for a long time, and it kept with him through his whole career. I'm going to suggest
probably true.
The only scene people should really watch from this has to be the stripping sequence in which Mick Jagger is doing a music video, because that one works for me.
Fucking Chris just wants to watch movies where gangsters strip. That's all he wants.
I got it tight.
I'm gonna look up your Pornhub history, my man, and it's gonna be like gangster stripping. Chicago Al Capone strip.
Right.
I mean, I have a thing. The Untouchables.
Get Lucky Luciano.
The Untouchables would have been untouchable if they had just shown a little skin.
Very Touchables.
Yeah,
Boy, it
I
brings
mean,
a
I'm
new
fine with
meaning
that.
to Goodfellas. Okay, well, I guess that puts me on in the firing squad here. So, okay, I really, really struggled with trying to find a movie on this one because, again, I struggle. Genre shifts are tough to gauge because it's
a little bit
so
of a challenge.
Anti-instinctual of a movie, you know, to downshift to a different thing in the middle of a movie. It's extremely risky.
Or upshift.
But yeah, or upshift depending on what you're doing. And in some cases I question, you know, like I said, I kind of looked up what the rest of the internet world thinks of what they think they would classify genre shift films. And one movie that I saw on there a lot, and I'm not gonna lie, guys, it's been between two movies that I've kind of narrowed it down to, and
I've been in the same
literally
position.
just waited till the last minute now to kind of decide on it, and a lot of mitigating factors have come into play. So I am going to choose. I've been saying this since Boruff brought up the theme, and it's been in my head so I just gotta go with it. I think I'm gonna go with the 2017 documentary Icarus. I don't know if you guys have seen that movie.
I have not. I don't even know what this
No.
is.
I don't know anything about it.
It is I believe it won the Oscar for Best Documentary when it was nominated. It's
This
on
is great.
Netflix.
This is our first documentary, I think.
Yeah, it not only is our first documentary, but it's also extremely timely because if where we're recording now, if you're following along the news, unless you're living on Mars, Russia has decided to conquer Ukraine.
For our recording, for our audience, it's February 26th for us. It's only a couple, 3 days after the invasion.
We're still in the era of hope because Kiev is still standing. But this particular movie, this documentary, I thought of this genre shift because I thought it was so fascinating the way this movie handled this subject. I'll just spoil right now. Ultimately, the movie's about the Russian doping scandal at the Olympics, but the way the plot unfurls.
Maybe I did hear about
very,
this.
very,
the time
very
of the
interesting.
Academy Awards.
Yeah. So I thought of it, and I love the way this movie kind of very drastically changes what the movie's about as far as a documentary is concerned. So I'm kind of playing a risk here with you, Boruff. Like, it's not... My other pick was the other one that I'm not going to say it because I don't want to take a card away from Zach, because I have a feeling he might pick it. I kind of question whether there's a genre shift at all. And even this one, it's kind of weird because it kind of happens, you know, if a genre shift happens in the first 15 minutes of the movie, aren't we really just introducing the first pitch? And the first genre isn't really genre, but more or less atmosphere or characterization or sort of contextualizing. So this is where I'm kind of like in this fuzzy area. So, 2000.
I like it. I want to say, I don't think this is a criticism of this choice. I think it's a good challenge choice in a way that,
Yeah,
for
and again,
a theme.
I was going with my other choice, but then Putin decided to be a dick, and now I feel like we need to highlight how much of a dick.
Well, what has Putin not decided to be a dick?
That's very true.
He had a very punchable face as a child. Just side note.
That's right. Now he's just a punchable old fucking man. Okay, so before we go, let's get a rundown of the points because bonus points for once in round one were divvied out, and they were all given to Boruff, who wanted to disqualify this film. So, Boruff, you have 12 points because you got a bonus point from me for saying that others have done this better, and Zach, you got a point from Zach for at least, you know, saying that this movie is more of an academic exercise rather than watching a movie. So you have 12 points for final voting. Zach and I have 2 bonus points to give out with 10 points for final voting. And Boruff, you have all 3 of your bonus points. So with that, this discussion was certainly much more enjoyable than watching the movie. And maybe that's just because of my health, but so be it. Boy, this has been fun. Great to see you guys.
Yeah, I'm genuinely excited to do our first documentary.
Yeah, me too.
I have been, my wife, every time I mention a documentary, because like nonfiction is sort of where I cut my teeth when I got into show business, so I've kind of got an affinity for it. But Sarah's always like, don't do a fucking documentary. It's not, you know, it's a news report. It's not really a movie. I disagree, but
No, I'm
anyway.
actually very excited too because I love documentaries.
You guys have never
and-
seen it, right? You guys have
Yeah.
never seen it? Okay,
I've never
excellent.
seen it. Yeah,
Excellent.
I'm very
Excellent.
excited.
Great.
You know.
Okay, good. Great. Excellent. Well, on that note, thank you all for joining us on this interesting discussion. I promise you this episode was probably more enjoyable than that movie. So, with that in mind, find us everywhere. We're The Movie Trap. We're on YouTube, Spotify, I guess, and all this stuff, and Facebook,
Russell,
Twitter.
Could I ask, do you have anything that's maybe very true, very obviously a promise that you could make to our audience?
Well, I think that I can promise you that. No, I can't. What do I want to?
Oh, I was trying to lead you into.
Oh no! I've got to. So, with that in mind, I have been Russell Carlson. Thank you for joining us. I have been joined
sorry,
by
I
Chris
jumped the gun.
Boruff. Yeah. All right. I'll take it again.
Absolutely jumped the gun.
I'll take it again.
I thought we were going into it. I was like, is he going to announce like
Right? Yeah. I was like,
baby or
what?
something?
What?
What's
Yeah.
gonna
Right.
happen?
Yeah. Right.
Oh no!
Did I
was
promise
just
you a
doing
kidney?
the traditional sign off. I was jumping the gun.
Anyway, thank you all for joining us. I have been Russell Carlson. I've also been joined by my co-host, Chris Boruff.
I am still Chris Boruff.
And I've also been joined by Zach Powers.
Chris Boruff loves movies where mobsters strip.
And that is almost a promise, but for sure Movie Trap promise is that Diane Ladd is too young for Chevy Chase's mom.
Well, that's the Movie Trap promise, which I jumped the gun on.
All right, have a good night, everybody.
Why don't you go to a hotel?
A hotel? You must be joking. Look, I need a bohemian atmosphere. I'm an artist, Mr. Turner. Like yourself.
You juggle. Why not? Why not? Why not? A jongleur. It's the third oldest profession. You're a performer of natural magic.